Throughout history, women have faced conflict in a multitude of ways. From expressing their patriotism on the battlefield to gaining the right to vote, they have struggled to find equality. In a political setting, this issue remains prominent, and many continue to fight it. One of the most influential movements began in the 18th century.
Ladies had begun hunting for social justice and hoping to find equality and respect in a man's world. There were those few women who were not part of the social crowd, those who stood out, and those who wanted to fight the status quo. Thus began the women's suffrage movement and the fight for equal rights.
The beginning of this social battle was difficult and couldn't seem to grab the attention of the public. Beginning in 1792, women would fight for many decades, only being included in the Constitution in 1920.
Throughout the 1820s and 30s, which historians called the cult of true womanhood, many believed women should be no more than the cliché role of the submissive wife. They had no right to land or to own and run businesses. They weren't even allowed the courtesy of a vote.
The struggle of the women's suffrage was not an easy one. It was a long and draining fight that would endanger and imprison many women's rights activists. But, in the end, through hard-fought battles of conflict and compromise, those free spirits would finally have the equal rights they fought so hard for. There are many individuals who stood up against discrimination, but there is one brave, upstanding lady whose name needs special recognition.
Jeannette Rankin, the first woman in Congress and a strong activist against violence, was the only member of Congress to vote against U.S. participation in World War II, and one of very few to vote against World War I. As a woman who spoke out against violence and an activist for the women's suffrage movement, she was not the most favored member of Congress.
Rankin was born on June 11, 1880 in Missoula, Montana, a controversial and opinionated state that was the epitome of what the suffrage movement fought against.
Rankin was always extremely studious and responsible. Most of her adolescent and teenage years were spent studying and working towards graduating.
After graduating with a basic teaching degree, she taught briefly in Missoula, but became restless in the boundaries of teaching at the time.
I think she's just clearly one of those people who has a character that is formed for fortitude and toughness and not really caring about what other people think.
She became conflicted with the roles and limited opportunities society had given her and wanted to chase after something that she could enjoy. Much to the dismay of her community, Rankin, from a young age, had a skilled hand in mechanics.
Unfortunately, for a woman of the time, the role of engineer, architect, or inventor were improper. Around this stage in her life, many marriage proposals came her way, but she felt no inclination to accept. Instead of marrying and becoming a baby factory, as she had called her mother, she began a career in social work.
In 1910, people gathered to vote on an amendment for women's suffrage, a topic that Rankin supported fully. Being raised in a town that opposed these ideals, she was very excited, obtaining posters of her own accord and volunteering to put them up in shop windows. This snagged the attention of the suffrage leaders, and they asked her to go out into the field to attract voters.
At first she was tentative, having no prior experience in politics, but took the job anyway. After a few weeks, she began feeling as though she had no impact, being sent to the most difficult and opinionated towns, one of which was Ballard.
Rankin later wrote in a letter, "I was sent to Ballard and worked for 2 days to get a meeting place, distribute leaflets, put up posters. 7 people came to listen and talk. It was only later that I could confess my early frustration to others, but when I did, one of the Seattle women said, 'After we saw what you could do in Ballard, we knew we could use you.'"
After hearing that and receiving positive feedback from the suffragists she worked with, Rankin's confidence was boosted. Soon after, a suffrage movement amendment won out in Washington, granting the women there the right to vote. The amendment did not use the words female, feminine, or woman in writing. This caused a lot of conflict between the sexes, and many men stated later that they would not have voted to push the amendment through if they had known that they were giving women the right to a vote.
When I was looking back through historically with Rankin and the things that she had done, I know that I'm sure there were compromises that she had to make to try to get the right to vote for women and these big monumental things that her male counterparts didn't have to deal with.
I was talked to in ways that a woman professional should not be talked to. I was harassed, and it was ugly.
Rankin traveled to spend the holidays with her family back in Missoula, where suffrage amendments had been looked to for comic relief and had been treated as a farce.
So you just kind of have to steel yourself to the fact that not everybody's going to like you. And there's going to be haters. And they're going to say mean things about you.
On impulse, Informed by her practicing with the suffrage leaders and politics in the suffrage movement, she decided to make people have a more positive attitude towards women's suffrage.
After speaking to the Missoula City Council, an invitation to appear in front of the House on February 1st was delivered to her. Women had never before been allowed on the House floor. The news of a woman speaking in Congress spread like wildfire, calling men and women from around the country to come and listen.
There were all sorts of reasons it was considered that women shouldn't have the vote that would flow over into why women shouldn't serve in office, that they were too weak and too delicate, that politics was a rough and tumble man's game, that they would be polluted and corrupted by it, etc. And that women didn't need to speak their own mind about various political things. The men and their families would do that for them.
The floor ended up being packed full, men and women spilling out the doors, all waiting anxiously to hear Rankin speak. At the end of her speech, when the amendment was put up to vote, her speech had a good effect, gaining majority vote, but falling just short of the 2/3 needed. The result of the votes promised success in the future for both the women's movement and for Rankin.
Conflict isn't always negative, and it doesn't have to be nasty. Differing opinions is really how we get to good policy.
During her time as a suffrage leader, she did many great things for the movement. She won out many rural areas, slowly but surely gaining popularity for the cause. She was the driving force in the Montana suffragists.
Because of her politically active brother and her talent in politics, Rankin returned to Montana. In 1914, she won the women of Montana the right to vote. There was a lot of debate and conflict about Rankin at this time. Instead of turning away and backing down, she decided to run for a seat in the House of Representatives.
Montana gave women the vote, and hence they could run for office. So while she was in Congress, she was in a unique position of working to get women the vote while she was already in Congress. And she said that one of the proudest things she did was her vote for the 19th Amendment. And she was the only woman to vote for women to get the vote.
Once she had a foothold, she pushed for the creation of a committee on women's suffrage, and it was finally approved on September 24th, 1917.
Rankin has said, "How shall we explain to them the meaning of democracy if the same Congress that voted to make the world safe for democracy refuses to give this small measure of democracy to the women of our country?"
I think women being involved in government is such a healthy thing. I think women sharing power with men in making the decisions about our country makes our country stronger and less likely to go to war.
Rankin's pacifistic nature caused her to vote no to war in both the cases of World War I and World War II. After her 2-year term ended, she focused more than ever on the movement. Her return to politics took place in 1939, where she won yet another seat in the House of Representatives. Rankin once again ran into conflict when she voted against World War II.
When she went off the floor of Congress after that vote, the press came after her and she hid in a phone booth somewhere in the cloakroom in Congress. So I can't imagine what she had to face after she took that vote.
Although Rankin's political decisions were disagreed with, she refused to compromise her beliefs.
She finally left politics in 1943, where she decided to travel, drawn by Gandhi's study on nonviolent protest. Jeanette passed away on May 18, 1973, but remains to this day a symbol of women's rights.
More and more, women are becoming a force in the United States government in both the House and the Senate. Although Rankin's time has passed, women in politics continue to fight inequality, but they move ever closer to their goal of equal rights through hard work and compromise.
So I think that you just gotta realize that if you don't take risks and endure some pain, you're never gonna soar. You're never gonna be what you really are capable of being if you're too afraid of taking the scary step.
I think it just boils down to that until women make up at least 50% or more, it's never going to be enough. I think somebody asked Justice Ginsburg once, when will we have enough, at what point will you feel like there are enough women as Supreme Court justices? And she said, when we make up all of them. And that's the reality, is because it's been men for so long. And until it's normal for us to be all of them, we should never stop trying to get more women to run.